Okay, one more chapter before we get through this section, and we'll be almost done with the book of Leviticus. We'll have to go back and read the Day of Atonement sections in chapters 16 and 17, and then Leviticus 24, which we skipped over, and then the ending. But pretty soon we'll be done. I had some trouble with this one because I took like a 2-week break in the middle of the month, and have kind of broken up Leviticus. I did some of it before and some of it after, so it seems like it's been a long time to me because I had that gap in the middle. Anyway, starting now in Leviticus 20. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, any Israelite or any alien living in Israel who gives," what does the footnote there say? Or sacrifices, "any of his children to Molech must be put to death. The people of the community are to stone him. I will set my face against that man, and I will cut him off from his people." So I guess cutting off can refer to the death penalty here. For by giving his children to Molech, he has defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. If the people of the community close their eyes when that man gives one of his children to Molech, so they're just not going to be attentive to it. Don't see, don't hear. Don't ask, don't tell. I don't want to know about it. You do whatever you want to do. I don't want to hear about it. And they fail to put him to death, I will set my face against that man and his family, and will cut off from their people both him and all who follow him, and prostituting themselves to Molech. I will set my face against the person who turns to mediums and spiritists, and to prostitute himself by following them, and I will cut him off from his people. And we just got done reading that cutting someone off can mean the death penalty. It could mean excommunication, but as we read about here, stoning can be considered a form of cutting off. Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and follow them. I am the Lord who makes you holy. If anyone curses his father or his mother, he must be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother, and his blood will be on his own head. We've heard that several times. We read about that in the previous chapter. We read about that back in Exodus. A lot of this stuff is stated multiple times. A lot of the laws we got in the previous chapter, we've already read in previous chapters before that in Exodus. And we're going to read a lot of it again in Deuteronomy. So over and over again, there's a lot of repetition here. Over and over and over and over and over again, we're going to be saying a lot of the same things. Now, in today's culture, in our society today, the smart people today have decided that this means that more than one person wrote this stuff. If you were to listen to the smart people talk about it today, they would tell you that each of these repetitions, each of these statements stated again multiple times, is an indication that there were 2 or 3 or 4 different people who wrote this, and then someone later on kind of took it all and combined it all together. That's what the smart people today would tell you. I don't think the smart people are always very smart, though. I think in this case it's very simple. I'm not a preacher, but I have read enough books and listened to enough sermons and people talking about things to know some of the stuff that they like to tell each other about preaching. In fact, one of my mentor at my church down the road here just made a comment about this a week or 2 ago when I last spoke with him. But there's basically 3 rules for preaching. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And that's pretty much what Moses is doing here. He's repeating himself many times. He's saying the same thing over and over again so that they get the point. That doesn't necessarily mean that this was written together, that this was patched together from 3 or 4 different sources. It just means the guy says the same thing 3 or 4 different times. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress must be put to death. Again, that's referring to consensual sex here. That's a law that the people were invoking in that strange passage in John 8 when they bring the woman caught in adultery to Jesus and ask what to do with her. She's an adulteress, she should be stoned. The adulterer should be stoned too. Maybe they already stoned him, maybe not. I don't know. We never do know. But that's what they're referring to here. That's the law that they're drawing on there. If a man sleeps with his father's wife, he has dishonored his father. Both the man and the woman must be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. Again, we're referring to consensual sex here. If a man sleeps with his daughter-in-law, both of them must be put to death. What they have done is a perversion. Their blood will be on their own heads. So they did that which is deserving death. They knew the penalty. Okay, we read back here at the beginning of the chapter, verse 1, as we've read in many other cases. He said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites." So the Israelites are supposed to know this, and they were going to know this because Moses was going to tell them. Moses and Aaron and the priests were going to tell the people this message that they're getting from God. So the people have no excuse. They knew if these two people, this man and woman, come together in an illicit affair and get caught and get stoned, their blood's on their own heads. They knew from this instruction that they weren't supposed to do it and what would happen if they did, and they did anyway. If a man lies with a man as one lies with a woman, both of them have done what is detestable. They must be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. If a man married, now I don't think we necessarily have to put people to death today because of these laws. All right, this was a covenant community with God, and He's trying to keep the covenant community pure and keep their bloodlines pure, and not to get their bloodlines intermingled and degraded, so that eventually they can produce a perfect Messiah, which they do in 1,500 years or so. So I don't know if we necessarily have to. These might be principles for living today, but especially if the New Testament covers the same material in cases. But we don't necessarily have to put people to death because of getting. We certainly don't put adulterers to death today. Okay, we haven't done that in a long time. I don't know when the last time was we actually took that law seriously enough to follow it. Men have slept around with other men's wives, and have gleefully and gladly done so all throughout our history as a country. Now, up until recently, we did take it upon ourselves to put homosexuals to death. I remember when I was a teenager and I was doing a paper out, and in my paper out days, I had a paper out that was just right around my neighborhood, and so I would actually walk up and down the streets to throw the papers out. And my dad would drive the car, and he would wait at the end of the street, and I'd get in the car, and he'd drive me to the next street over. And then I get out and I walk on the street and I throw the papers. So it took about 30 minutes. So Dad was in the car the whole time, kind of waiting for me, and I was throwing the papers. And this was in the morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning or so. Did this for a number of years. It was a great bonding experience with my father. I still remember that very. That still is a very deeply imprinted part of my memories with him. But I remember at some point during that time period, I don't remember exactly when, there was a story in the news. Because we were listening to the news. We were listening to the morning headlines, and then we listened to sports talk radio, local sports talk radio, later on as the hour clicked off or whatever. And we would hear the news, and there was a story of a young gay man who had been, brutally attacked and beaten, set on fire, I think. So out in some field somewhere, I forget exactly the details, but I remember it. I think I was in high school at the time, and I was not gay, and I did not understand. I admit, do not understand the gay mind. I'm completely 100% a heterosexual male, and I have no idea what makes men attracted to other men. I can't even fathom it. I don't even know why women are attracted to men. I can understand the mindset of a woman being attracted to women better because I'm attracted to women. All right, I have no idea why a man would be attracted sexually to another man. I'll admit I can't fathom that. It just makes no sense to me. But I remember thinking, you don't need to set a guy on fire. Okay, you don't need to set a guy on fire or whatever it is they did. I don't know. I think his name was, what was his name? I might look it up at some point, look up the details. I'm pretty sure it's a pretty well-known case from sometime in the 90s, I believe. But you don't need to do that. So there was a point in time not too long ago when we took it upon ourselves to do that kind of thing. But as far as committing, as far as stoning people caught in adultery, I mean, men, like I said, men have been sleeping around with women for centuries. All throughout our country's history, we've been doing it. We haven't cared a bit. So, we haven't actually followed these laws in a long time. I'm not even sure if the Israelites follow these laws very strictly. If a man marries both a woman and her mother, it is wicked. Both he and they must be burned in the fire, so that no wickedness will be among you. When it says burned, I believe this is referring to burning up their corpses after they've already been stoned. You take them outside the community, you stone them, then you burn up their bodies. I believe that's what it's actually referring to. If a man, there's again that reference to fire destroying. Okay, water and fire are both cleansing and destroying agents. And in this case, a fire is a destroying agent, destroying the wickedness. If a man has sexual relations with an animal, he must be put to death, and you must kill the animal. If a woman approaches an animal to have sexual relations with it, kill both the woman and the animal. They must be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. If a man marries his sister, the daughter of either his father or his mother, and they have sexual relations, it is a disgrace. I remember Abraham had done that. So if Abraham were living in this day and time, he wouldn't be able to do that. They must be cut off before the eyes of their people. He has dishonored his sister. Oh wow, there's actually a dishonoring of the woman being involved here, and will be held responsible. If a man lies with a woman during her monthly period and has sexual relations with her, he has exposed the source of her flow, and she has also uncovered it. Both of them must be cut off from their people. Do not have sexual relations with the sister of either your mother or your father, for that would dishonor a close relative. Both of you would be held responsible. All of these are referring to consensual sex here, by the way. If a man sleeps with his aunt, he has dishonored his uncle. They will be held responsible. They will die childless. If a man marries his brother's wife, it is an act of impurity. He has dishonored his brother. They will be childless. Now again, remember that in certain cases, you're supposed to actually marry your brother's widow if your brother dies before he can have any sons. So that's not referring to that. This is referring to taking your brother's wife while he's still alive. This is actually what Herod did, I believe, and what John the Baptist got after him for in the days of the Gospels. Keep all my decrees and laws and follow them, so that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. You must not live according to the customs of the nations I am going to drive out before you. Because they did all these things, I abhorred them. But I said to you, you will possess their land. I will give it to you as an inheritance, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has set you apart from the nations. You must therefore make a distinction between clean and unclean animals, and between clean and unclean, or unclean and clean birds. Do not defile yourselves by any animal or bird, or anything that moves along the ground. Those which I have set apart as unclean for you. You are to be holy to me, or to be my holy ones, because I, the Lord, am holy, and I have set you apart from the nations to be my own. A man or woman who is a medium or spiritist among you must be put to death. You are to stone them. Their blood will be on their own heads. Again, because they knew they weren't supposed to do it, they did anyway. They knew the penalties, they did anyway. So those are the holiness laws of Leviticus. So we have now read the beginning and the end, the middle sections, and the inner sections of Leviticus. We read to the offering sections at the beginning chapters. Then we skipped ahead and read the ritual feast days at the end of the book in chapters 22 and 23. 23 and 25. We skipped 24 for now. Then we read the priest sections in 8, 9, 10, 20, and 21. Then today we read the holiness sections in 11 through 15, and then now in 18 and 19. So tomorrow, or whenever I do this again, we will be getting to the Day of Atonement, which occupies chapter 16, and the central place within the book, the high point. If you think of it as an ascending and descending mountain, the Day of Atonement is at the peak of the mountain, the tip of the mountain. And we'll read chapter 17 too, which I believe is kind of like a companion chapter to it. Then we'll go ahead and read chapter 24, which we skipped earlier, and then the ending of the book, 23 and 27, which conclude the thoughts. A lot of this stuff, as I said earlier, is repeated in other parts of the first 5 books of the Bible. Okay, there's a lot of stuff here that is stated 2 or 3 or 4 times. Deuteronomy, of course, is all about saying it again. Some of the, Leviticus 19 repeats the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20 in a different order and with somewhat different words. And a lot of these laws are stated multiple times or rephrased slightly. It may be stated twice, and the second time we get a little bit more information. Like in that section right there. we had the sex laws in chapter 18. And to a large degree, we set them again in chapter 20, this time adding the penalties for what happens to those who violate the sex laws. So there's a lot of that going on here. It makes it tough for us to read today because we're not used to that. Our literature today and our reading today doesn't do that. We don't have that emphasis on just kind of repeating the same things over and over again without there really being any, like, okay, the order in Leviticus, like I said, is is a pyramid type structure. It goes up and down. There's these outer sections, the middle sections, the inner sections, and then the centerpiece, which is the Day of Atonement. We don't really write that way today. Okay, it's like that's not how our literature is really framed today. Leviticus isn't written necessarily straightforward. I don't know how much we can say, all these sections of Leviticus that start with the Lord said to Moses or something like that. I don't know if we can say these are being written and recorded for us in the order in which these sayings happened. Okay, I don't know. I don't think we can say that at all. There is an order to Leviticus, but it's not like a straightforward order in the way that we would think of it today, or the way that we would expect it to be written today. We would read Leviticus and assume everything to be laid out in systematic, start to finish fashion, because that's what we're used to. That's what we teach in our schools. That's what we understand in our culture. That's what we're used to. And that frames our entire understanding of the first 5 books of the Bible altogether, because Leviticus itself is like a microcosm of how all 5 of the first 5 books of the Bible are written, with Genesis and Deuteronomy being the beginning and end. Genesis being a prologue, Deuteronomy being an epilogue, and then Exodus and Numbers being parallel to each other as well. Of the first part of Exodus is the history leading up to the Exodus. The second part has to do with the tabernacle. The first part of Numbers has to do with them preparing to leave. And the second part of Numbers has to do with them actually leaving. And then you have the ending section, Deuteronomy, which is the epilogue, as Genesis is the prologue. And so Leviticus itself kind of gives us a glimpse into how all the material in the first 5 books of the Bible is arranged. And this is a concept that we completely miss in our teachings of the Bible today, because it just isn't what we expect. It's not what we used to. It's not what we're used to. It's not what we're looking for. It's not what we think it should be like. And we aren't approaching it on its terms. We're trying to make it fit our terms instead of approaching it on its terms, and that's where we have all these problems. So anyway, we're nearing the end of Leviticus, and I have to say I'm looking forward to finishing Leviticus and moving on. I like the narrative sections better. I'm going to be honest. I'm used to that. Like, I'm used to thinking of these stories in terms of moving forward, okay? Genesis moves forward. It's easy to understand Genesis, at least once you get to the Abraham sections and going on, because it's a story that moves forward. Now, yeah, there's lots of parts of Genesis where the same thing is said 2 or 3 times in a row. We saw that with the flood, how it kind of says the same thing 2 or 3 times in a row. Or it says the same thing kind of backwards and forwards. It'll say one thing, and then it'll immediately say the same thing again, but just kind of like backwards almost. That happens a lot. It's a narrative technique that's used a lot, even in Genesis. But Genesis is easier for us to process because it's a story. It's a series of stories. It's a narrative. Even in the beginning of Exodus. Although again, in Exodus, when Moses is talking to the Pharaoh, that whole section there's a lot of kind of back and forth stuff. There's a lot of sections where Moses will say something, and then there'll be like a pause in the text, talking about what happened earlier or something like that, and just kind of, it's not really written the way that we would write today, and it's not really written the way we expect it to be written. And we're approaching it with our expectations, and we're not changing our expectations to match what it actually is. And so that leads to improper conclusions. That leads to a skewed reading of the text, which in turn leads us to some improper conclusions. I'm not saying that I'm immune to this. I'm not saying that I've cracked the code or figured it out in a way that nobody else ever has. Not at all. What I'm saying is that I have become aware of it. I've become aware of my own shortcomings in this regard, and I am working to overcome those. I'm not saying that I have. We're talking about a long time ago here. This stuff was written around Mount Sinai in the year 1446 or so BC. Okay? It was a long time ago, so almost 3,500 years ago. On the other side of the planet, halfway across the world, in a totally different culture, written in a different language, to people who have very, very, very different cultural experiences than ours, and who they are bringing their own expectations that are very different than ours, and so we need to know what that is. They can't know what our expectations are. They're gone. Like, that's not on them to do that anymore. It's like they're it's not their job to meet our expectations anymore. It's our job to understand what they're thinking if we want to understand this text properly in its original context. And again, we also have to consider that there's more to the Bible from that. Moses basically had this much. We have all the rest of this now. And we need to read Moses in light of the rest of this stuff. So we need to read Moses, first of all, for what he said, and then secondly, for what the rest of the Bible says. And that is all part of understanding scriptures. Is this a task? Yes. I believe it's something that God expects us to do. I believe he gives us the ability to do that. We're not all teachers. I get that. I wasn't either until recently, I suppose you could say. But I believe that those of us who do understand this have an obligation to explain it to those who have a harder time with it and get them on their way to understanding it. So that's what I'm seeking out to do here. And that's it for today. And I will finish off Leviticus next time I do this. And then we'll move on to Numbers.